Thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I'm very excited to talk to you about a topic that I am incredibly passionate about, and that is marijuana. As Matt mentioned, I'm the Director of Addiction Services at Linden Behavioral Health and Edward Elmhurst Health. And as in my role there, I see a lot of cannabis. I see a lot of marijuana, and part of what I'm concerned about is where we're going. And so that's as a state. So that's what I'd like to talk with you a little bit about today. What is this substance? What do we know about it? And what does that mean in terms of public health and public safety? I'm calling this presentation Marijuana Past, Present, and Future because where it's been and what's going to happen with it are two very different things. On the left here, this is what many of you might be acquainted with, which is the leaf. Where it started, where we're at right now is more in the middle, however. There are definitely people still smoking, of course, but we're starting to see these edibles, and I can actually magnify it here, and you can see here that these strawberry gummies are for medical use only, and you can also see that they're in a very child-proof bag there. And this is pretty standard for what we see. And then on the right, that is actually, that is an extract. So an extract is a very high THC, very potent compound that's derived from cannabis, but it's actually taken in a different way. You either vape it or you do what's called dabbing. If you've heard of dabbing, it's a way of taking this extract and basically vaporizing it manually using a butane torch. More on that later. But that's part of that actually, the extracts, that is the fastest growing market in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon right now. Because if you want to get high quickly, that's what you use. Because the marijuana is not going to use pack as quick of a punch. So backing up for a second though, what is marijuana? Marijuana is a plant with 500 different chemical compounds, 100 different cannabinoids. So there's a lot of things in there. The two that we talk the most about though are THC and CBD. CBD stands for cannabidiol, if you've heard it summed up that way. THC though binds to CB1 receptors, and here's where they're located in the brain. And if you look where they are, the spinal cord for pain, hippocampus for learning, memory, and stress, appetite, higher cognitive function, this is what impairs you when you're high, movement in the basal ganglia and cerebellum, and then the medulla for the nausea and vomiting. You can see some of the therapeutic impact that we know that marijuana has, as well as some of the impairing impact. And it's where you have receptors allows a cannabinoid to influence your brain. It can do that because we actually have endogenous cannabinoids, and this is something that a lot of people don't know. Our bodies actually produce cannabinoids on its own. You can promote it by putting something in your body that ups it, kind of like how we have endogenous opioids that kill pain for us, but if you take opioids, that boosts it up. That's how these things function. They work on existing systems that we have in the body. It is the most used substance in this country right now behind alcohol and tobacco, and there's a number of different ways to take it. You can smoke it in joints and blunts. You can use a bong, which is another way of smoking, but the smoke actually is filtered through a water essentially, which is what filters a little bit of it out. You can vape it using a vape pen. Or you can, this is what dabbing looks like actually. You use a modified bong. You can actually see here, if you're not as familiar, there's the end of the torch, right? And there's the extract down there on the nail through that modified bong. Something that you're going to see a lot actually, we're going to talk a lot about today is cannabis entrepreneurship. And if you take a look at this guy's shirt, you can see it says Weed Maps right there. That's actually an app that you can download that helps you find cannabis wherever you are. I think their motto is, or their slogan is "Find the good stuff," but that goes for medical dispensaries too, right? Because that's all that we have here. So there's a lot of entrepreneurship around this. There's a high variability of concentration. So this is something also that a lot of people aren't aware of. A lot of parents these days think, well, maybe I smoked pot in college, or I used something. It wasn't that big of a deal. It's not that strong. Things are different now, actually. So back in 1995. I went backwards. We don't want to go backwards. Back in 1995, let's use that guy there. It was about 4% is what they seized off the street. By 2012, that had climbed to 12% THC off the street. By 2016, it had made up to 16% THC off the street. And as I will show you in a little bit, it's actually gone further than that right now. And the weed that kids are smoking these days, even when it's coming out of our dispensaries, is actually up to 5 times as strong or more. 6, 7 times as strong as what people were smoking back in the 60s. So in many ways, it's actually a very different product. The bottom there actually is looking at emergency room-related visits, and we'll talk more about this later, for marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. A lot of people also don't realize that, yes, you can actually be poisoned by marijuana, even if you won't have an overdose. So it's an addictive substance. I had a really interesting experience. I was downtown about a week ago talking to the staff of Cook County Board of Commissioners President Toni Preckwinkle. She actually testified before I did at a hearing on Monday of last week. And there were some things that I was concerned about what she said, and she took a meeting. She wasn't able to come because a crisis had popped up that she needed to attend to, but I was talking with her chief of staff and one other. And I was really surprised that kind of towards the end of our conversation, her chief policy director actually said, it kind of threw out there, I've read some things that's actually debatable whether or not marijuana is addictive. No, there's not a debate. there's really not a debate. This is one of these things where it's amazing sometimes who hears things about this and how if the scientific consensus, there is no debate about this. We're living in a world right now where I feel like you've got your facts and you've got your alternate facts, and that alternate facts aren't true, right? They're actually not true. And sometimes people say there's a debate because they say there's a debate. There's no debate. Straight from the CDC, 1 in 10 adults who use cannabis will become addicted, 1 in 6 kids, and 30% of daily users. It is absolutely an addicting substance. We see it in our clinics all the time. It's actually the third, actually I'd probably say the second most common substance we see in our clinics. There's a dependent syndrome that's been identified. There's a withdrawal syndrome that's been identified. This is not up for debate. Not even a little bit. So it is an addictive substance, and that's part of why this is dangerous to be promoting in public. And we'll talk about the health impacts in a little bit. But whenever you have an addictive substance that you're increasing exposure to the public, that generally doesn't mean good things. And we'll talk more specifically about what we've seen. In Oregon, here, this is from the Oregon DEA. This is what consumption looks like there now through their program. You can see the kilograms per year consumed by each age group. So you've got 13 to 17 here, 18 to 24, 25 to 44 is the biggest demographic, 45 to 64, and then 65 and up. And part of what's concerning when you look at these use patterns is if you look down here, look at how much is daily. It's about 50% of each demographic, and actually the young kids are the ones smoking more than once a day, multiple daily. So again, when you enact policies that increase use, you tend to see more of this. And again, 30% of people who use daily tend to develop a disorder, a substance use disorder to this, because it is a habit-forming substance. So what is medical marijuana? We've had it in Illinois since 2013, and to be honest with you, I think it's a bit of a misnomer, because it has not been approved by the FDA for the treatment of anything, nor is it prescribed or dispensed like medicine. Now, what would an FDA-approved marijuana drug look like? Well, it would look like this. We've had Marinol actually on shelves since the 1970s. This is a THC product actually. That's what medicine looks like. This down here, it's called Epidiolex. That's going through the FDA, and this is Sativex. It's going through the FDA. These are THC and CBD compounds. So medicine, how medicine works, right, is that if you go to a doctor and you get a prescription for an antibiotic, like say azithromycin, you get something that says you're going to take 1 tab a day for 5 days, and if you go to a pharmacy, it is the same azithromycin no matter where you go, wherever you get it. You know how to take what you're getting. It's all laid out right there. What goes on right now with medical cannabis is that you basically get a card that says you can buy this because you have a condition. And then you go to a dispensary and you buy whatever you want in whatever quantity you want, up to the maximum every 2 weeks. And that's how it works. You can get the dabs, which, well, there's actually no evidence to support dabs are medicinally good for anything, but you can get the dabs, you can get the edibles, you can get any type of strain you want, and there are a lot of them. There's really, again, no limit up to the maximum. That would be the equivalent of you going to the doctor and them determining that you've got bacterial bronchitis, and them giving you a card that says antibiotics, and you like go to Walgreens, and they're like, well, all right, well, pick what you want. You're like, okay, and then you buy what you want, and you take it when you want, or however much you want, decide when you stop. That's not medicine, right? That's not how we do medicine. That's not how medicine works. We also don't smoke medicine. If you stop to think about that, you don't smoke anything, actually. You use nebulizers sometimes, but you don't smoke it. So I think medicine, actually, calling it medicine is something that I think is in and of itself creating public health problems, because it changes the perception of the substance to be something that is perhaps even healthy or even medical, even though therapeutic, absolutely, and we'll talk about the benefits in a minute. There are therapeutic qualities to it, but medicine, I think, starts to shift public perception in ways that aren't helpful. So, with show of hands, how many of you have actually either been to a medical dispensary here or been to their website? A couple. All right, for the rest of you, this is going to be fun. I'd like to show you one because I think that it's best to actually look at what's really going on here. This is the one in Naperville, so it's close. What I'd like you to do is just, this is their, if you go to product and you go to flowers and buds, this is their flower and bud menu. And so if we scroll down, I'd like you to just look at the names of these with me. Durban Poison and Alien Rock Candy and Bio Jesus, Ghost Train Haze, Gorilla Glue number 4, Kosher Kush, OG18, that stands for Original Gangster, guys. So when you look at the names of these things, I guess what I want you to think about is, who is this aimed at? And the answer is not 58-year-old women with MS, by the way. I mean, if you think about it, like, who does this appeal to, right? It's not them. You also notice that they make claims here that it kills cancer cells. This is something that's not true. And if you even look back, if we go back up to the top and read, like, what does Bio Jesus do? It will relax and numb both mind and body, so best reserved for use before bed when high functionality is not required. As its name suggests, this strain has sweet grape aroma, powerful, long-lasting euphoria that knocks out stress, leaving your mood. So basically, you get high, you get high. If you go to the next one, you'll see it kind of like you get high. If you look at them, they're not all like that. Some of them say things like they're, it says this was the #1 Cannabis Cup winner of 1996 with the love child of Purple, I think it's Purple Urkel, or Purple Tie. The Cannabis Cup in 1996, by the way, was not about medicine. So it's one of these things. This is a medical dispensary, right? This is actually what it looks like. This is actually what they're selling. Here is the one down in Romeoville, and the reason why I like them is you can actually see THC concentrations. So if you add these two together, you can see that these are 23%, 23, 25%. They've got one that's 29, although I don't think it's on this page. Here's a 26 plus 0.9, so that's kind of like a 27%. Remember, Woodstock pot was 4%. 4%. So this is something that's literally 6 times stronger, right, than what people were smoking. So imagine chain smoking 6 joints, and that's what people get from one now, if they're using this stuff. This, by the way, also, in terms of the scientific literature we have, no one was using stuff with THC content this high. No one was. It kind of maxes out around 8% because that's what you can get from the grows that people get for their research. So this goes well beyond that. And these extracts that I was telling you about, here's what they look like, right? And these are things that are, here's one that's 81%, here's one that's 83, 85. At one point they had one in stock that was 93%. But these things are, again, make no mistake, not medicine, despite, again, this is the medical dispensary in Romeoville. And these are what are most strongly associated with the psychotic breaks. So we'll talk again more about health in a minute, but one of the only thing in terms of psychiatric impact of cannabis in either a positive or negative direction that we have very strong evidence on is that cannabis causes psychotic breaks. Some of them are transient, and some of them are persistent, and they don't actually go away. It is not common, but it's also not rare. We probably see 1 or 2 of them come through our clinics every month. So again, like this, and oftentimes they're using these things because, again, it raises your risk of it happening. So if it sounds jarring or sound like, this is not reefer madness, by the way. This isn't like this is the devil's substance. This is just actually what we see and what's going on. And I think a lot of times when you talk about negative health implications of these, people are quick to say it's the overreaction that we used to see back in the old days. That's what's going on. What I'm going to tell you today is going to either come directly off of websites that you can see as well about what's going on, from government publications or from peer-reviewed scientific literature, which is the standard for how we create knowledge. And I'm happy to provide you with all of these things. Sometimes the debates that we see come from industry-sponsored research, and we'll talk about what tobacco did a little bit later too, but the industry wants to promote its interests, right? And so they produce research which supports their claims. Never a good idea to look at that. You want to go to medical journals, you want to go to government publications, because that's where you're going to get the best information. One other thing to look at for medical. So the edibles come in a lot of shapes and sizes, but they oftentimes look like this. Again, who is this marketed at? If you're 62 and you've got pre-diabetes, and you're not going after this, right? Kale is not one of these ingredients. And in fact, actually, I'm going to go back to my magnifying glass for a second. If we actually look at what's in them, if we go back to this one here, you can actually see that it is in fact Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Pebbles, Captain Crunch, and Trix. Who is this marketed at, guys? I mean, like, seriously. And part of what's unfortunate about this, the bill that we have right now that's going through says that for the first year of commercial sales, if we're going to commercialize marijuana, the only people who get to sell it are the current medical dispensaries. And they don't actually even have to change over their stock, right? This is not, these are recreational products, right? Let's actually be honest about this. So this is what's actually going on right now in the medical dispensaries. And what's interesting as well is that I've given this talk, and I've given it to actually some people who have been in the audience who have been medical dispensary owners, and some of them have even said, we don't really like these names, we don't want them. But part of what's going on here is that they don't grow it themselves, right? You don't grow and sell. There's growers, and that's what big cannabis is about, the industry, the people growing large quantities of cannabis and supplying it, and they have a plan. They know what they want for this product. They know what they want to, they know how much they want to sell. And you sell far more if you have it open to everybody over the age of 21 than you do if you have medical. But first, you have to do it in stages to basically socially norm it. Right? I don't know if anybody saw this, but there was a bit of a hullabaloo about how CNN over their New Year's coverage actually showed someone in Colorado wearing a gas mask, like a bong gas mask on a bus. One of their reporters was wearing it. Like that, this is the sort of thing that normalizes this sort of behavior, and it's not necessarily behavior that we want to normalize. Because again, there's health implications to this that we'll talk about in a minute. So going back to the presentation. So what is it actually good for? So again, I think balanced information is important, and this is, again, it's not that there's no therapeutic benefit. The National Academy of Sciences, this one here on the bottom, this is an outfit that publishes massive literature reviews based on really solid science. And when I say solid science, the definition of that actually really matters too. So when I say solid science, it's not just about is it produced by a trade association, it's is it replicated and is it a good study. So the gold standard of investigating anything is what we call randomized controlled trials. Ideally they're what's called double blind so that there's no influence that you have on the people that you're studying. You try to collect it that way. You have large N's, which means large sample sizes, right? And that way you can generalize, and that's ideally how we study something. Then on the whole other side, you have a case study, which is usually like maybe one or two people, and that's not nearly as strong. So what they do, they look at everything, they put it all together, and they come out with these literature reviews. This is opposed to what we oftentimes see in media or in newspapers, where like someone will come up with something, they'll go on Dr. Oz, they'll say it's true, and then everyone will think it's true. Right? Like if you think about coconut oil, it was like everyone should eat coconut oil, and then like 6 months later it was like, but actually like saturated fat is saturated fat, and agave, and I feel like eggs go back and forth as to like they're going to kill you or they're great for you, it's like that sort of thing. The research really matters, right? And so these guys, they do their research properly, and this report, which again you can actually get it for free online, they sum up their massive report in 6 pages of conclusions, and what they found was what it's actually good for is stimulating appetite, suppressing nausea, MS spasticity, pain relief, and short-term sleep outcomes, and that is it. Now, additionally, you'll notice that a couple of those say cannabinoids only. That's because it's really difficult to study cannabis as, again, it's currently done from dispensaries, because you saw all those different strains that you can get, right? They're all different. And it's not just THC and CBD, right? There's hundreds of different compounds in there. So when we study something, to take that noise out of the data, you usually have to isolate it. And so a lot of studies are done on just like, say, cannabidiol, or just on THC. And so when someone says even that MS spasticity, you can smoke pot for that, well, actually, we haven't studied that for pot. We've studied that for cannabinoids, CBD only. So unless you're using just a CBD product, That's actually not true, but you can go in and buy smoked marijuana or dabs or anything if you have a card that says that you can buy it because you have MS. So I did a, pain's up there. I did an interview recently about, there's a lot of talk about putting pain on the list. Should we have pain on our list here in Illinois? Because right now we don't. And what's interesting about that is that pain is supported by research, actually, right? This is something that can numb pain. Like opioids, it's an addictive substance that ideally should not be your first line for pain, but yes, it actually can be used if you have intractable pain. However, our delivery system is broken. That's basically what I was showing you with those dispensaries. Like the system we have for providing this to people is broken. And the issue with pain is that it's subjective. So you can go to a doc, and you see this in other places where you have a lot of these conditions that are entirely subjective, like anxiety, depression, pain. You can go to a doc who's basically working with a clinic. They're sometimes right next door. You go to them, you get your card for $250, you go next door and you buy the pot. And so you just walk in and you say, I'm in pain, and they say, here's your card, and then you go next door. And that's not what we want, right? It would be great if we had a way for people who actually have pain to be able to get this if they've tried everything else and the risk-benefit works out. But that's not the system that we have. And so what I'm concerned about, for example, with adding pain is what's going to happen when you add that to this system. And again, there's a lot of interlocking issues here. The reason why, even when we're talking about medicine and therapeutic aspects, is that we're also talking about business and culture and society, is that this is all mixed up. There's a lot of interacting systems here, and it's important that you understand all of them to really see what's going on and know heads from tails. So that's what we know it's good for. We have it, though, for 39 conditions starting at age 18. And I mention the age 18 because your brain is not done developing until you're 25 to 30. And one of the things that we know for sure about cannabis is that if you're smoking it consistently from adolescence, that means daily or nearly daily, your brain actually changes its morphology over time. It doesn't grow where it's supposed to grow. It doesn't prune where it's supposed to prune. And the net result of that is that you lose 6 to 8 IQ points off of your intelligence. We have multiple studies that have shown this. So it's particularly dangerous to adolescents in that way. And so 18, again, if you look at these conditions, how many should you have at 18 anyway, right? But this is a bunch of stuff. 39 different conditions. Like Advil isn't really good for 39 different conditions, I feel like, but that's what's on this list. Some of them are things like hepatitis C, which is like, we have a cure for that. It's called Harvoni. This actually doesn't really do much for that. But this is what we've got. Some of them even, I won't skip a slide. So the evidence for this, we've got those 39 conditions. Where is the evidence? The problem is that there's not very much. This is a study that came out a couple years back that looked at the conditions that were in 80% of states, or the conditions that were prevalent in most states, let's put it that way. And what they found in this was that based on a literature search, findings indicate that for the majority of these conditions, there's insufficient evidence to support the recommendation of medical marijuana at this time. A significant amount of rigorous research is needed to definitively ascertain potential implications. That kind of goes along with those things that I showed you first about what we know it's good for, and then those list of 39 conditions that we have it approved for. The science just simply isn't there for the vast majority of this. And in fact, this is a copy-paste out of that NAS report I was referring to. There is nowhere insufficient evidence to support or refute that cannabis or cannabinoids are an effective treatment for all of those things, and the ones with red dots are ones that we have on our list here in Illinois, despite that there's literally no evidence that we have that it's good for these things. You'll notice one that I think is really important to talk about here, and that's epilepsy. Because a lot of people think that that pot is good for epilepsy and seizures. It's one of the first things you think of. But there's actually no evidence. And the reason why people think so is that there was a case study for a girl called Charlotte Figi. Charlotte's Web, you might have seen it on CNN, other places, got all sorts of press because she was going from like 300 seizures a day down to something like 12 a week, and it changed her life. And so why should we keep this life-saving substance out of the hands of these poor kids who are seizing all over the place who need it? Well, the problem is that that's an N of 1. That is one person, and that's not how we determine what medicine is. That's not even how we determine what works. And what we found about cannabis is that for a lot of different things, about 30% of people might get some benefit, 30% of people get nothing, and another 30% have an adverse effect to it. And that's why it can't pass through the FDA, right? We have ones going through, right? These compounds that are the same every time, that's medicine that's going through the FDA. We have clinical multi-phase trials for a reason. It's actually to protect the public. That's why we do these things. epilepsy actually has no evidence to support it. Nothing strong, just a few case studies. But this is what people think. It gets blown way out of proportion. Glaucoma, if you think back to the beginning when we first started hearing about this, everyone was talking about this. The American Glaucoma Society themselves say that although it can lower the intraocular pressure, its side effects and short duration of action, coupled with a lack of evidence that its use alters the course of glaucoma, preclude recommending this drug in any form for the treatment of glaucoma. So basically, it just sends your intraocular pressure on a roller coaster ride. Up and down and up and down and up and down. It does no permanent good, and you've got to use it all the time, which means you're going to be high all the time to get any benefit. That's also the deal with pain, right? You have to smoke it all the time in order to be numbed out by it. Same thing with opioids, right? It's the same problem. You ideally aren't using either one of those for pain. But glaucoma and PTSD, this is one that I put that emoji up there because that was my reaction when I heard that they added it to the list, because there is no evidence to suggest that it's useful for PTSD, and in fact, it's what we call contraindicated in medical fields, is that it's actually bad for you. We have 3 different therapies for PTSD, each of which have an 85% success rate. None of them are smoking pot. And in fact, avoidance of feeling is part of the pathology. And so if you're numbing out and getting high, you can't even engage in these things properly. So the interesting thing about that one too, when I testified at this hearing, I was talking to a gentleman on my way out who said he was a mental health professional from the VA, and that he was actually going to be testifying later in the day, and he said that he was one of the biggest supporters of pot for PTSD. He also said that you could kill cancer with pot. And he also told me that why should we not be able to use cannabis for these conditions if we can be put on SSRIs? Those are things like Prozac, Zoloft, Celexa, things like that you quote unquote, he said, you can't get off of those. You can get off of those. I mean, they're literally not addictive. That's part of why they're best prescribed for anxiety over things like benzodiazepines, which are addictive. And you shouldn't be on things like Xanax and Klonopin and Ativan and Valium. You don't use those every day, ideally, because they're habit forming. Zoloft, it's the exact opposite. But this guy's going to be standing up in front of Congress, telling them, as a mental health professional and as someone in the VA, this is true. And it's just simply not. So again, facts and alternate facts, but it's so hard to hear that because it's just simply not accurate. So why do we have the kind of system where we have 39 conditions, many of which have weak or no evidence at all, on our list, and we can sell it to 18-year-olds, and we're selling products like X-Wing and Gorilla Glue No. 4 and Maui Wowie and Kosher Kush? It's because of money. In business, we call this a blue ocean, where there's nobody there. And when you enter into that market space, so that's as opposed to a red ocean where there's a lot of sharks eating the fish, so the water is red with blood. In marketing, they call it a blue ocean when there's no sharks there and you are the first shark. And that's what's going on here. They see an opportunity to influence public perception to make a lot of money off of it. And the same thing about why are we talking about commercializing, it's the same thing. It's about money. There's not like people parading in the streets saying, we want pot shops, we want pot shops. That's really not what's going on. The people pushing this are actually the entrepreneurs. They're the people growing it. I want to talk a little bit about this because a lot of people say, oh, it kind of sounds when I say it like a conspiracy theory. Like there's these people and they want this to happen and there's a lot of money and and it kind of sounds like I'm crazy, but if you actually look at witness slips that are filed for these hearings, you'll see these names of the people who grow the pot. They hire lobbyists who are around Springfield telling pseudoscience to legislators who will listen to them. So here's an example of one actually that you'll see on witness slips sometimes. This is Revolution Enterprises. These guys, they've got multiple grow houses. They actually make the most pot in the state. So when you think about suppliers, we're not really talking about as much cartels anymore or like drug dealers living on like the west side or something like that. This is what they look like. They've got blazers, they've got button downs, they've got MBAs, and they've got billion-dollar business plans. And this makes them incredibly dangerous because they know what they're doing, right? These are corporations, and these are the people growing the pot right now. And again, part of the, in my mind at least, absurdity of all of this is I went to their blog at one point, and this kind of blew me away, and there's one here about tips for low temp dabbing. And so you use these extracts, right? And so they talk about here how to medicinally optimize your dabs, and then step 1 is literally about talking about the torch flame. And it's like, oh my gosh, like what medicines do you use like with a butane torch? And look, they're talking to you about the secondary combustion zone. You know what I'm saying? Like I have an inhaler in my bag. Like you just, like I've got asthma. We're talking about combustion zones. So, I mean, some of this is just bizarre if you actually think about it. And it's not really what medicine looks like. But these are the people who are doing it. Investment opportunities. So investinCannabis.com. There's a lot of places like this. All these places you can go to get in. And that's what they say. Get in early. Put your money in early because it's going to blow up. To give you an example of this as well, the people who wrote the bills that were put in by Senators Steens and Rep. Cassidy, they're the same bill, they entered in twin bills, were actually from the Minority Cannabis Business Association. They're a national group promoting the growth of commercial marijuana. And they literally will give you model legislation that you can submit or you can alter. And that's actually what happened. I've seen it. I've seen what they gave them. Someone supplied it to me because they want this to move forward. The Marijuana Policy Project is another group like this, where they're well-funded, they have a lot of money, they buy lobbyists, they want to move this forward because it's an industry. This is all about capitalism. And these people actually, they're very upfront about what they're doing if you just look. So like if we go to their target market, so their target for vapor, single mothers with children. Cigarette smokers actively trying to quit, music festival enthusiasts, target for pain relief. Here's children with epilepsy, which is like a double terrible thing to say because, again, epilepsy isn't even supported in the first place, and we're talking about kids. It'll get you kicked out of your contact sport, actually, right now. Cancer patients. Down here, recreational use, grandparents, government officials, company executive, you know. It's, But like the people who are, if you want to see something interesting as well, you can actually look at where these people donate to, because it's all public record, right? Who are they giving to? And then look at who's advocating for this. You can literally follow the money on this. It's all public record. All you have to do is look. Because again, if you think about like gun control, right? Whenever there's a big mass shooting, we all are like, wait a second, we need different gun regulation. And something like 88% of the country wants different gun control laws, but nothing ever changes. And the reason why is that the NRA cares about this every day, not just after people get massacred. And they have a lot of money. They're a very powerful lobby. And so because we don't care every single day like they do, nothing really changes, even though the majority of the country, polls show, would like something to change. It's the same way with this. These people care about it every day because this is their business. This is their livelihood. When I give this talk to larger audiences and there's people who come where this is their livelihood, they get very upset that I'm saying these things because they don't like that I'm talking about it, that this is about business and this is about capitalism. But it truly is. And there's a lot of misconceptions that we'll talk about in the remainder of the time we have today that are willful on these people's parts because they encourage use. So something to realize about addiction profiteering, it really does depend on addiction. So this was a 2007 study that looked at alcohol sales, and the bottom line is that 75% of alcohol sales come from people who consume 73.85 drinks per week, over 10 drinks per day. So essentially, alcohol companies depend on alcoholics or they'd go bankrupt, right? 10 drinks a day. They say drink responsibly, but if you drank responsibly, they'd be out of a job. They can't do it. The same thing goes for cigarettes. The same thing goes for pot. You have to get people addicted. And that's where your money comes from. And that's where they're going here. They see a lot of dollar signs for a lot of people. So the main arguments you're going to hear for the future of cannabis that a lot of people are asking for in this industry is, and that they'll get people to buy into, are either we have to sell cannabis to everybody, or we're locking people away and we're giving kids felonies, or Illinois has no money and we need revenue. So I want to talk about each of those briefly. So about the first, there's actually three, I'd even say four different issues that get conflated. One is decriminalization, which we actually already have. You may or may not know that right now in this state, possession of marijuana under, I think it's 10 grams, which is a lot of pot, is like a traffic ticket. It is not an arrestable offense. It is literally like a traffic ticket. It doesn't go on any permanent record. We have that, decriminalization. But even if you want to talk about fine reduction, that is different than legalizing or commercializing, which is actually also different. So we say legalization, but what we're talking about here and in many other states is commercialization, creating pot shops, taxing it, creating an industry, creating big marijuana. Vermont actually was the first state that has passed a true legalization bill about 2 weeks ago, where there's no more fines for personal use and personal possession in your own home, and you can grow your own, but they do not allow for sale. And that is actually the only reason why it passed. The governor said he would not pass a bill that allowed for the creation of big cannabis, because he did not want that in his state. That is legalization, actually. But a lot of people don't understand that you can split those things apart. You don't have to create an industry. And then the medical use of compounds is also a different issue. At this hearing I was at, they had a lot of physicians who like pot come in and say, like here, medical benefit this, medical benefit that, again, some of which are more or less supported from what they said, but they would come in and say that, and that's not even the discussion that we're having, right? If we're talking about commercialization, we're not talking about therapeutic benefits. That's a whole other discussion. But people will come in and say, look at these therapeutic benefits. This is fine. If you legalize it, then more people can have it. It's really confusing arguments. And so, again, it's not locking people up, which again doesn't happen. The statistic is it's 0.03% of our jail system right now is just for marijuana possession, which is about right when it's actually not a crime anymore. It's just a citation. But that's very different, again, than legalization and commercialization. So talking about money. So whenever people talk about revenues, and the number they float is like $300 to $800 million in revenues, which may or may not be quite a bit inflated, but even say it wasn't, you have to talk about costs, or you're only looking at part of the equation. So what we know about the other two addictive substances, alcohol and tobacco, is that they are money drainers, not money makers. In 2012, the alcohol industry brought in $16 billion in profits, in tax revenues rather, but cost society $249 billion in car accidents and missed work and lawsuits and work absenteeism and healthcare costs, all these things. $249 billion, and tobacco was $33 billion to $314 billion. You lose $10 for every one that you generate when you talk about addictive substances. There's no reason to suggest that marijuana would be any different. They just come from different pockets. So it's not to say that the revenue isn't there, but if you're talking about is this a good idea for our society, you have to look at all the pockets. This would be like running a restaurant and only looking at the money that you bring in for selling food and not looking at the cost of the structure and the point of service system and the wait staff and the food materials themselves, and just saying, look, I made this much money selling food. That's not how a business works. That's not how this works. So if you're ever talking about revenue and they're not also talking about costs, you're looking at half the ledger. And that's just simply not accurate. And what we know about the finances is they truly don't add up. So given this, why the momentum? Why do we keep talking about this? A lot of people say that it's just the social movement that's inevitable. That's actually, that's inaccurate. So in 2017, there were no states at all that approved new legalization bills. Not a single one. It was voted down everywhere. And Vermont actually is the very first state that has passed a legalization bill through the legislature and been signed by a governor. And again, that only happened because it was separate from commercialization. Every other state used a ballot box initiative, which allows these companies to go around the legislature and go straight to public perception, which again right now doesn't have all the facts. To give you an example of this, in Delaware, that state lost its ballot box initiative by 1% to have recreational pot. The pot lobby there spent literally $4 million to public health's 100,000. 4,100,000. How do you compete with that? You can't compete with that. There were TV ads that they were buying. They were doing all sorts of things that you couldn't respond to because you don't have the money, and they have the money because if you invest in the front end, you make it up later, right? Because when you can sell to everybody, you're going to make a lot more money than you do right now. So it's viewed as inevitable, but truly, like, progress has slowed considerably in recent years. There are many myths, misperceptions, and inaccuracies. Some we already talked about. It's not addictive. It's just weed. It's not an accident. Again, like, why is there so much misunderstanding? We've seen this sort of thing before. Did anyone recognize these ads? So big tobacco, right? This is the same playbook. They used to do this. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Associate it with health. 20,000 physicians say Luckies are less irritating. And I don't know if anyone watched Mad Men, but it was real. It was real. It's toasted. Don Draper made that up. So this one, they're highlighting here the stimulant effects, right? So they're saying avoid that future shadow, reach for a Lucky. So see the jowl there coming off? They're basically saying you're going to lose weight by smoking, which is true. It's a stimulant. It speeds up your metabolism. But they're trying to sell that. They're trying to sell the health benefits. And then this one actually, for Chesterfields, they actually talk about scientific evidence, right? And if you read the small print, like it's best for me. They're trying to say it's less harmful than others. But again, they associate it. They produce their own science. They make statements. They associate it with health. And people buy it. And it's actually even trickier with marijuana because there are some therapeutic benefits. Some. right? But what goes on right now is people say, oh, the state says it's legal, or there's 39 conditions, and isn't it medicine? Isn't it legal already? Everybody gets confused. And again, if you're trying to commercialize a product, you love this. So if it's not that bad for you, it wouldn't be legal. It's not as harmful as alcohol. That one you hear a lot. Like, well, we already have this with alcohol. So if pot isn't as harmful, which is debatable, by the way, we'll talk about that. But even if we said it was true, why shouldn't we make it equal? Well, I guess we could cliche it and say 2 wrongs don't make a right. Or like if one horse is out of the barn, that doesn't mean let them all out. But alcohol kills 88,000 people a year in this country. Literally, 88,000 people a year die because of alcohol, directly or indirectly. Car crashes. If you think about actually man-made destruction, how much we've hurt and killed ourselves, tobacco and alcohol have killed more people and destroyed more lives than anything else in the history of humankind. So that doesn't mean that alcohol is from the devil or someone can't enjoy a drink, but when we talk about public health and safety, they've been terrible things for us, actually, overall. They've been awful. We would probably be better off as human beings without them, in truth. So to say that we've done this with something else, so we should do it with a new thing, doesn't really hold up. Because it's, again, if you are not already doing it, why add to it? It's kind of like if alcohol is jumping out of like a 5th-story window, say, and pot's jumping out of a 3rd-story window, why are we jumping in the first place? Is it better? Maybe, but why are we jumping? That's kind of where my mind goes. So what are the actual health impacts of marijuana? In the short term, impaired short-term memory. I didn't mean it. Trying to go to my more laser pointery one here. Impaired short-term memory, impaired motor coordination, which can result in driving difficulties, which we'll talk about. Altered judgment, including the risk of risky sexual behaviors. And high doses is paranoia and psychosis. Addiction, the altered brain development I was talking about. Poor educational outcome, we've associated with dropouts from high school, college, lower grades in both of those. Lower lifetime earning potential as well. Cognitive impairment with the IQ loss, diminished life satisfaction and achievement, symptoms of chronic bronchitis, and again, increased risk of chronic psychotic disorders, including schizophrenia, for people with a predisposition. So when people say that it's like a harmless substance, I was talking to someone yesterday who said that the rationalizations that their son gives, he's in college right now in California, he's like, oh, it's fine, Mom, it's really pure. It's no problem. It's like, well, it's not, but it kind of like goes under this assumption that it's a safe product anyway. It's not a safe product, actually. It's not like you're eating a cucumber or something, like where you're fine with it no matter what. It's not actually good for you. Poison control calls in Colorado. You can probably guess where they legalized, right? But they spike. And if you look at ages 0 to 8, they've been growing at a far greater rate, 206% to 43, 108 to 22. Hospitalizations have increased over 70% since legalization in Colorado, average of 30% per year. It's medicinal. We already talked about that a bit. And these commercialized products, we talked already a bit about the names, but if you just look at the products, this is out of Colorado, and you can see the lollipops and the gummies. Again, these are not appealing to an older demographic. And the reason for this is that 90% of addiction starts in adolescence. 90. When you rely on addiction to make money, and 90% of addictions start in adolescence, you would be stupid not to market at kids. That would be a foolish business decision not to go after the kids. So they do. But that doesn't mean we should allow it. That doesn't mean we should promote it. But this is where it goes. Here's the youth use rate in states by their marijuana program. If it's pink, it means they've got a recreational program. If it's white, it's a medical. If it's blue, it's nothing. Visually, you can see. Now, what's interesting about this is that the data we have has actually found that youth from 12 to 17 actually has not gone up in states that have commercialized. However, it does skyrocket in the 18 to 40 demographic by a bunch. So the verdict is still out on that. However, what we have found amongst youth is that the kids who are already smoking smoke more. So although the use rate doesn't go up in terms of how many people choose to do it, because you can generally find pot if you want to find pot right now, the kids who have been getting in trouble get in more trouble. So it's basically like kicking them while they're down is what enacting this policy does. Additionally, we've seen the perceived risk of marijuana drop further and further and further. And thus far, We haven't seen, again, the youth rate increase to match it, but every time in history we've seen the perceived risk of a substance go down, different things at different times, right? But when perceived risk goes down, use generally goes up. So I would not be surprised if, as we continue to track this from monitoring the future out of Michigan, the NISDA data, which is what this is based out of the SAMHSA, which is a national organization, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that change in the future. So another way to look at this, alcohol and cigarettes amongst high school seniors have been going down essentially since the 1970s. Marijuana, though, look at that, right? And as everything else has been going down, marijuana has been holding steady. That is not an accident, guys. You know, like that sort of trend doesn't happen when use rates, everything else has been so effective. People talk about, is it a gateway drug? So in that graph there, on the right and left, the only difference is whether or not the kids are smoking pot. And on the right is alcohol use, binge alcohol use, heavy alcohol use, cigarette use, and other illicit drug use. And that last one, like, does it lead to harder substances? That's 10 times higher rate, 20% to 2%. So again, all you really have to do is use your eyes. Prevalence of heroin use, again, 12 to 17. No pot, yes pot. No pot, yes pot. So yes, it is. And there's mechanisms for this, right? If you are already putting something in your body, there's a psychoactive substance that you're using to cope with something or do something recreational, it's a lot less of a jump. And then maybe you're also buying from a dealer, it's a lot less of a jump to go over to something else because you're already engaging in that sort of behavior. It's sort of like, I just did a lot of research on vaping, and the National Academy of Sciences just came out with a big study on that as well, 700 pages, and what they said there's conclusive evidence about is that if a kid uses a vape pen, they are more likely to use combustible cigarettes, period. And actually that means that more kids who were not smoking will smoke if they start vaping. Again, no debate. This is what the research finds. So why? Because they're already putting something in their mouth and inhaling, and a lot of them have nicotine, right? So it's not as much of a jump. That's how these things work. This one as well, we hear a lot about opioids in cannabis. This was a longitudinal study. This was published in a psychiatric journal, a very well-respected one. It found that this is looking at the chance that you're going to develop a new opioid prescription pill disorder, whether or not you smoke pot. And what they found was if you don't smoke pot versus if you have occasional use, your risk of developing a new prescription opioid pill disorder 3 years later was 5 times as high. And if you frequently or very frequently use it, it is 8 times as high. So when we talk about using this as a substitute, we're talking about creating time bombs. And we can talk about that even more, but this is what the research tells us about people who use pot and whether or not they develop another addiction. The answer is, it's not guaranteed, right? Because risk doesn't mean causality, right? If you speed on the highway, you're putting yourself at risk for an accident, but it doesn't mean you're going to get in an accident, or even that you ever will. But the risk is higher, and when you're talking about population-based health, you have to look at overall risk. So other things you're probably not hearing about. Social justice. A lot of times people say this is going to be good for social justice. What we found in Colorado, this is straight from the Department of Public Safety, is that there were more juvenile arrests because it's still illegal under 21. But whites were arrested 8% less, Hispanic kids 29% more, and black kids 58% more after it was legalized. So not so much. In terms of where they're located, this is also fascinating. So let's pull up the magnifying glass again. So what you're looking at here, this is a map of Denver. And what you see here, this is a map of racial communities. So you see this natural segregation that you get in big cities. The orange section is the Hispanic districts. The green ones are Caucasian districts, and the purple is African American. And this one in the top left that you see is the darker ones are more affluent communities. And so if you look, you can see there's basically this upside down L of where pot shops are. Those are the dots. And look where the minority communities are. And again, look at where the dark squares are, and look where the pot shops are. It's not that they're all there, but they cluster in low-income communities of color, because these are the most vulnerable populations. This is also where all the liquor stores are, right? It's the same sort of thing. And in fact, they spring up everywhere. I don't have this slide up here, but in Colorado, there are literally twice as many pot shops as there are McDonald's and Starbucks combined. Like, it's huge. Well, actually, no, I misspoke. There are more pot shops than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. So there's double the pot shops. So yeah, you add them together, McDonald's and Starbucks, there's still more pot shops than there are those things. It's the same actually in Oregon now. They just passed it, and Washington's on their way. So they come out, there's a huge amount, and this is where they tend to cluster. I want to talk about traffic safety for a minute. I know I'm almost at the end of my time, so I'll try to go quickly. How do you know if you're too high to drive? It's really tough. So the way people smoke, briefly, each one of these arrows is an inhale. And so people take longer drags to start. This is THC in your blood over time. And then they do what's called self-titrating at the end. They take smaller puffs, and then it drops out of your system pretty quickly, actually. And goes into your brain. So unlike with alcohol, where if it's in your blood, it impacts you, THC, it's very lipophilic. It's attracted to fat, and there's a lot of fat in your brain, so it just sucks right in. Also note in this study, 3.55% THC. So again, what are people using? What happens with edibles is different. So here's smoking and vaping, same general trend line. With edibles, it takes 3 to 4 hours to actually even get into your blood because it has to be absorbed through the stomach lining. It's the same reason why if you drink on an empty stomach, you get drunk more quickly, because exposed lining is what absorbs the drug. And so if you have food in there, it goes in more slowly. When you inhale, we've got all the surface area in our lungs, right? There's nothing in there. There's all these little alveoli, it goes straight in. Your stomach is different. So not only does it hit you later, you can be driving when it hits you, but additionally, you can't titrate. So whatever you just ate, it's going in, right? Unless you induce vomiting, which you're probably not going to do. So no matter what's in there, if you don't know how much is in there, if you don't know how you're going to react to it, it could be really bad. And there's pretty much nothing that you can do about it because you can't slow down. So edibles have an additional risk involved. I'm going to go through this quickly because I know we're almost out of time, but it's hard for us to test whether or not someone's actually high or not, to be honest. In terms of impairment, walk and turn is a field sobriety test. Cases are here on the left. These are people with pot on board. Controls do not. And you can see starts too soon, loses balance, stops, misses heel to toe. There's a clear, there's a clear difference between if someone's smoking and if they're not. 2 or greater clues to help is considered impaired. The median number for no pot was 0. As you'd expect, the median for pot was 3. And what's important to know about this too is this is statistics speak for it didn't matter whether or not there was above or below 5 nanograms per liter in the blood. And that's what's been proposed as the 0.08 of pot. But it didn't matter how much was in there. Any THC at all produced this effect. Number of finger to nose misses, same deal. Median 0 with no pot, median 5 with pot. Again, no difference above or below 5 nanograms per liter. Does it have a real world impact? It does. There were 14 more vehicle claims in Colorado, 14% more due to marijuana after legalization, 6% in Washington, 3% in Oregon. And when you combine, or 4%, 3% combined because of the differences in population in these states. But again, where you see the greatest concentration and the longest policy, you see a huge increase in traffic accidents. Here are the DUI cases, driving while high. Again, guess where they commercialized? Percentage of traffic fatalities where someone tested positive for marijuana. Again, up and up and up and up. Traffic deaths related to marijuana in Colorado. Up and up and up and up. Black markets continue to thrive. Again, just very briefly, people think all of a sudden, like if you have a legal market, that all of a sudden the drug dealers are going to disappear. It doesn't really work that way. It's not like all of a sudden they're like, oh, I've got competition. I guess I'm gonna just drop this life. I'm gonna go to dental school. I'm gonna become a dentist. No, guys, right? They do meth, they do heroin, they do human trafficking. There's a lot of things that they can do otherwise, and they can undercut because when you tax something, it costs more. That's what's going on with cigarettes. There's a huge cigarette tobacco black market because you don't have to pay taxes on it, and there's very high taxes on tobacco. Additionally, there's a lot of diversion that goes on. So in Oregon, the way the law is written allows them to grow 80%. Or rather, they only consume 20% of the pot that they grow. This is straight from the Oregon DEA. Came out last year. What that means is that the price of pot is less in Oregon than anywhere else in the United States. And what that means then, what's a good entrepreneur to do? They ship it all over. These are DEA seizures from one county, Multnomah County. This is where Portland is in Oregon. We're one of their hotspot zones, by the way. But they ship to all 50 states and overseas. They found Oregon pot everywhere because, again, the way the law is written allows you to grow far more than they could ever possibly consume. So they ship it out. So To sum up, cannabis, it is an addictive substance that's chronically misunderstood. Again, there's a lot of misperceptions. Maybe, hopefully, you heard something today that you hadn't seen before about the substance, about the industry. A lot of people don't know this stuff. For public health comparisons, I like to compare it to lead. So in the 1970s, we learned that exposure to lead causes neurodegenerative illness. And we took it out of our blinds and our paint and our pencils and our glass because the less exposure society has to lead, the fewer neurodegenerative illness cases from lead we saw. Pot works the same way. The more people who are exposed to pot, the more psychotic breaks we see, the more traffic accidents we see, the more ED visits we see, the more addiction we see, because it causes these things. It's associated with these things at a population health level. And by promoting the use of cannabis, we promote these consequences. Commercialization is funded by addiction profiteers who look to deregulate. Something to think about with this. Once you start it, they will continue to lobby, right? They're still going to work for their interests. So whatever we put on them in terms of limits, they can deregulate that later. Additionally, when people talk about the revenues going to one place or another, do you guys remember where the lottery money was supposed to go? Schools, right? It didn't. I don't know if anyone followed that. It didn't. It did not make it there. So again, they can say whatever they want in the beginning, but what actually happens after that, anything's fair game. So I know I'm 5 minutes over. I appreciate the extra time. I know we want to take some questions. Should we do that now, or should we just move on?
I think if anybody does have anything, by all means, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for your attention and time. Yes?
What are the verified withdrawal symptoms that you see?
So irritability, lack of sleep, heightened anxiety. I think some people have some tremors. I can get you a full list if you'd like them. Just grab my card, send me an email. I'll be happy to give that to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it's not prescribed, then how do they get how do they get a card? They send it to the government or something like that?
Yeah, so the way it works, you go to a physician who fills out a form that says that you have a qualifying condition. So they don't say, they know what they're doing, but they don't say, I'm prescribing you pot. They say, you have hepatitis C. So then you send that into the government that says a physician has certified that I have hepatitis C. The government sends you a card. You pick the dispensary that's called your home dispensary, and then you go and you buy it.
So with a panel of people at the government, or is just one guy sitting at a desk?
Oh, well, when the physician verifies you, they say you're good to go. So yeah, they basically just verified that a physician has given you the clearance. Yeah.
You address topical stuff? How does that
Mm-hmm.
come into this?
So what's the best way to put it? So research is what I hang my hat on the most, and it's hard. So that's a different administration route, right? So absorption through the skin is different than whether or not you're inhaling it or you're ingesting it. We don't have a lot of data on that. So when you're buying these like CBD tinctures or oils or things that you rub on your skin, you don't know. You know, like CBD, cannabidiol, actually, it is not addictive. It's what's most associated with health benefits. When people ask me, like, CBD oil, should I use it, should I not? You can try. I mean, I'm far less opposed to that because you're not going to get addicted to it. And in fact, a lot of states, their medical program is CBD only. Because again, you're not smoking pot. It's the most supported by evidence. Do that instead. It's kind of like an herbal remedy, right? Like if you're using ginseng or turmeric or things like this, maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. We don't have strong evidence for it, but it's not going to hurt you. That's what I would say to the CBD oils. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you again for the extra time. Appreciate it.
So much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem.
I know, Nick, when people were coming in, there were a small bit, we just wanted to get people's feedback. If you didn't get a feedback form, maybe raise your hand and Matt can get one to you. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the lovely Matt. Don't pass them on.
And again, if you have questions, I've left my card up here, and my email is just aaron.weiner@eehealth.org. Please feel free to reach out. Anything that I spoke about today, I can send you the primary sources that they came from, and I'd be happy to do it.